if you missed the first session, we talked about some founding principles and just things to pay attention to that sometimes in the euphoria of getting a school started and thinking about curriculum and kids and teachers and our philosophy and the things that motivate us, we have a tendency to overlook until we get into the second or third year and realize that there's some things that we haven't thought very carefully about, and we need to sort of catch up. So we talked about leadership, and we talked about policies and procedures, and we also talked about finances and thinking and learning to think ahead, so that we don't find ourselves in this typical, what I call a 5-year catch-up. So we get 5 years in, and things have been going along pretty well, but suddenly we start encountering issues on a scale that we didn't really anticipate, and they become, they become quickly they become complicated. A good example is my school in Roanoke. I was the founding head of Faith Christian School. We were a 6 to 12 classical Christian school. Grades 6 to 12 started out as grades 6 to 9, which, by the way, we didn't know was a bad idea, starting with 6th grade. Because it didn't occur to any of us that we had to go find 5th graders who were going to want to go to our grade 6. But we had that in our minds. We had these notions that there were dynamics that we observed in other Christian schools that we probably were going to be able to sidestep or avoid, or somehow we were going to be able to crash the curve. And so we started out with a tuition, I think it was around $4,000, something like that, which in 1996 in Roanoke, Virginia, that wasn't insignificant. But what we figured out with the help of some consulting is that by year 3, we needed to double our tuition. And so we had started at a certain point, and now I'm standing in front of a room full of parents, explaining to them that we mispriced the school, and that it wasn't an intentional bait and switch, but your tuition next year was going to be closer to $7,000 or $8,000 than $4,000. But no one was going to have to leave because we had a plan to do it and be able to hang on to everybody. And that largely succeeded, but it was a really, really tough time for the school that could have threatened the school's existence, because people very easily could have become disillusioned and distrustful of us and all of that. So thinking ahead and thinking about where are we going to be, or where might we end up in 3 or 5 or 7 years will give your school an advantage. So now we're moving into the not entirely startup, but kind of the early phase of the school. And what happens in this phase, as many of you know, is that you have to start making decisions about how you're going to apply your model and how you're going to actually practice your principles, which sounded so simple and obvious when we first wrote them down and said them, but all of a sudden, now that we're having to work them out in the actual lives of children who don't always cooperate, and the dynamics of families who also don't always cooperate, and the complications that of the operating in a church building perhaps, or the complaints from the congregation that the walls are getting scuffed and all of the other things that have a tendency to come up. We have to start making some decisions about how we're going to proceed. So let's get into this. First of all, mission is very important. We know that. We know that our identity, who we are, who we are here for, or for whom we are here, are essential. are essential. But as we begin to have to make decisions, it becomes more and more critical that we reference back to our mission as we make choices between options, between this and that. And the other thing that happens, of course, is that other people start having ideas too, right? And people start showing up at meetings and in offices and saying, hey, my kid would really like for you to do fill in the blank, whatever it is, robotics, or robotics seems to be the thing right now. Everybody wants robotics. I don't even know why. It looks dumb. It's not dumb, I'm sure. I'm sure it's very wholesome and helpful. But referencing back to our mission, reminding ourselves, why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? What was the how and the when that we had in mind? So that's always just kind of keeping our mission, our identity, our purpose in front of us. And we define the environmental values. I call them the environment in which children are being educated, in which we are all operating, in which parents are participating. They're moving in and out of the space, physical and otherwise. We have to start defining our expectations for the aspects of that environment you might call culture. So I like to talk about culture and environment in experiential terms. So it's easy to talk about it in sort of descriptive, adjectival terms, but when it really starts to matter when we talk about how students and how teachers and how parents are spending time and what they're trying to do when they're spending that time together. So we're asking ourselves questions about what does the discipling experience look like? Not just we want to make disciples, but we start asking ourselves what and how. How are we going to make disciples? What is that? What kind of experience then does a child have in our school? What's the kindergarten discipling experience look like? What's the second grade discipling experience look like? What does the sixth grade discipling experience look like? And we have to start making choices, and we have to start specifying how we're going to spend time. What will be the overall emphasis in our discipling effort that will help to define that experience for our kids? The same thing in the academic experience. It's very easy to say we want to be a classical school, and that means that we're going to study these certain things. But that doesn't tell me about the experience. That doesn't tell me anything about how it feels to be a child studying these certain things. So what do we want that to be? What do we want a kid to be able to describe to us? If I say, so, how's Latin? What do we want him or her to say back? Because we've arranged Latin in such a way that their experience is characterized by this experience. What does the social environment of our school need to be like? Is it going to be highly regulated? Is it going to be minimally regulated? What will we be doing as adults to facilitate meaningful social interaction with the kids? Are we just going to throw them out on the playground and hope nothing bad happens? Or are we going to engage with them, instructing them about how to build their own social structures? What is that experience like for our kids? And co-curriculars, not just what are we going to do and what are we not going to do, but why? And how much investment will we put into that? Are we going to be serious enough about co-curriculars that we're going to provide, say, transportation? Or are we just going to rely on the suburban caravan that carries people everywhere in our schools? Are we going to invite parents into the co-curricular space? Not necessarily just to rely on them because they could be cheap labor, but do we want parents and kids together in that co-curricular experience because we have an intentional goal for that? And then finally, not exclusively, what do we want to our community? How do we want the community experience? How do we want it to feel? Are we just going to wait for people to make friends and hope that they all, end up loving and loving each other and cooperating together? Or are we going to engineer a community? We're going to design a community and invite people into that experience. And how will they be part of it? And how much responsibility will they have for it? And it might sound like I'm overcomplicating these things, but we all know culture is going to happen. You are going to have a culture in your school, and it's going to be one of two types of culture. It's either going to be an intentional culture, or it's going to be an unintentional culture, right? So you're going to have culture. So the question is, to what extent do you want to be defining that experience, referencing your mission, rather than just whatever people happen to bring to the table and make available in all of these contexts? So these are conversations. I mean, you could have these prior to the founding of the school, but it probably makes more sense to be having these conversations once you've sort of seen who you have. Who's part of the program here? Who seems, at least in the early stages, to be attracted to what we're doing? And then in each of these different contexts, what are we providing? What do they need? How can they help us? And those types of questions. So to me, it's sort of again, I said at the beginning of the last session, at the beginning of the first session, it's hard to put the stages, carefully divide the stages of the life of a school into neat little packages, and there's always going to be some crossover, and we're always going to be looping back. We're always going to be asking ourselves the mission questions. That's my recommendation anyway. It's like, what are we doing, and why are we doing it, and is it working well, and what do we need to change, and what's changed around us? So we're always sort of looping back to some of the more fundamental questions, but as we get established in the early stages of the school, defining the cultural, defining the environment in which all of this is going to happen becomes really critical. Second thing, besides safety, that private school parents are known to value in their schools are community and culture. When we poll, so we do strategic planning projects with schools, and whenever we begin one of these planning projects, we conduct focus group interviews for as many people in the community as possible. So we try to get as many parents in the rooms as we can. We always interview all the faculty, and we basically ask the same set of questions to all of these parents. And it's amazing to me how even in schools that are very forward with their college preparatory mission, it's amazing to me how often academics, in terms of what parents value and what they're willing to pay more for, falls down around 0.4 or 5 in terms of frequency of mention. The things that are more prominent in people's minds are the safety of their child and the environment in which things are going to happen, and the degree to which they as parents are welcome into the social fabric of the school. So in essence, you could say that the two things that parents will pay for in their school are the safety of their child and culture. We are selling culture, if you want to put it that way. More than we are academic performance, more than we are curriculum. See, all the things that are important to us, because we're educators, right? I mean, they're the things that get us going. That's why we started our schools in the first place. I don't want to say that parents don't care, but they don't care. Not like we do. Not like we do. And that's all right. That's all right. It was frustrating to me early in my career because I just felt like if they didn't care about what I cared about, they weren't bought in. But they were still there, right? So that, I misunderstood because I didn't have children at the ages yet where I was really kind of sorting all of these things out. I just misunderstood what their motivations were and where they're coming from. And so these types of things, how a kid spends his time. Think, what do you ask your child? What's the question? Yeah, what do you ask? What'd you do today? I never asked. I stopped asking, what'd you learn today? Because it was always nothing. I know it all already, Dad. So, but yeah, what did you do today? Who did you talk to? How did you spend your time? Were your friends nice to you? Those are the things that matter more to parents and actually, of course, more to children. So what is school culture? Here's how I define it. School culture is the pattern of ideas driving the faculty's collective attitudes and behaviors, which either enhance the application of the mission in a kid's experience or diminishes the effect of the mission in the school experience. Essentially what I'm saying is that the faculty is the school. They are the school. And by the way, the faculty are your product as well. So they are the school in the sense that they are the people responsible who are closest to the delivery of the benefits of the mission and the program. And they're the product in the sense that that's what the parents are paying for. The parents aren't paying for an angelic eighth grader. That's not what they're expecting. What they're expecting is that not angelic eighth grader is going to get personal, careful attention from the people who I've entrusted with his care. So the culture we have, whether it's intentional or unintentional, will be driven by the attitudes and behaviors of the faculty. So they become central to this whole conversation, which is one of the reasons why you'll notice in schools that a very strict vertical operation in school, a hierarchical sort of approach to school, doesn't work all that well. Because whether I'm a board or a church council or a headmaster, I don't control the application of the mission and the priorities and the principles in the daily experience of the kids. And so I need those faculty who are there, who are crafting and defining the culture of the school. I need them bought in to what we're doing, and I need to be listening to what they think about what we should be doing and why as well. So the one upside of the snarky comment that I got from my teacher about what kind of a school are we going to be this week, Chuck, the upside of that is I was asking them. We were talking about it. We had a very flat organization, and it felt like we were flying the plane while we built it, and we were. This is in the startup, but they were in on it, and the result of them being in on it was that they were all in. They were all in. And like I said, Rhonda, the lady who was teasing me about bopping back and forth here and there all the time with what we were going to do in school, just retired this year from that school. So she spent 26 years, 23 years there. Second thing is, second aspect of culture, it motivates students, or it doesn't. Have you noticed, those of you who teach, that happy students are easier to teach than unhappy students?
Yes.
Notice that. You've noticed that. And a school culture can encourage students to cooperate and to be part of what we're doing here and to be partners in their own learning, or it can discourage them. And it can word I'm looking for. You can isolate them from the heart of what we're doing if the culture isn't intentional. We'll talk about some of the choices we have to make in order to make that intentional culture motivating for them. But I like kids who want to obey. I like kids who don't come to school every day thinking, how can I mess this up? And probably you've been in schools where there are a good number of kids coming to school every day, either intentionally or unintentionally. Their goal is to make things hard. Their goal is to put a wrench into the works. And they're going to think it's funny, even if they're in trouble. The good ones are going to think it's funny. So, and then finally, we need motivated parents. Parents who are motivated to invest. Invest not only in their own kids, who think when they see the tuition, well, this is worth it. I'm getting more than my money's worth. But also want to invest in other ways so that other kids have the opportunity to be enculturated in the same way as their own kids are enculturated. So we've got three constituencies. One is crafting the culture, and then two are either being motivated or they are unmotivated by the culture that's being crafted. And it all flows downhill. So if we want this kind of a coordinated vision within our school, we've got to work really hard. Really hard on the culture piece. So what kind of choices do we have to make? Early years, we thought we knew what we were going to do. Maybe we're out beyond our vision before a little bit. We're thinking, okay, we had this all planned out through fourth grade, and now we're heading into the middle school years. So we have to be making some choices. Or maybe we chose something, a grammar curriculum or something that we thought was going to work really great, and it's clunky and it's hard and the teachers hate it and the kids cry, and so we have to start making some choices. The basic principles that I work from when making choices about curriculum is 12 to K. Think about the end and then work your way back. I was surprised when we wrote Wisdom and Eloquence, when it was published in 2006, the thing that people told us they appreciated the most was just that simple little notion. That if you plan your curriculum from the end and then work your way back, it all works a lot better. And one of the reasons it works better is because you have the opportunity to determine what's essential. So you can design a curriculum in which sort of less is more, because you're focusing on the things that are going to matter the most at the next stage of the sequence, and you can leave some of the things aside that are going to be less necessary or unnecessary or less essential. But if we're just creeping out year by year by year, then it's hard to tell what is essential and what isn't essential, so we end up doing it all. Have to do it all. Do the whole book. Don't skip any chapters. Right? Don't skip any concepts. Make sure you do all of the practice problems at the end of every lesson and not half of them, because you don't know which half you're going to need, right? So all those types of questions get answered if we are reverse engineering our curriculum. We have pedagogical choices to make. This is hard. This is hard, especially if you are bringing people to teach, into your school to teach, who have previous teaching experience, either as homeschoolers, or having taught in another parochial or another or a public school, because every teacher has their way of doing things, and it's hard. It's very difficult to break our instructional habits unless we have something very concrete to adhere to or to imitate. And so the default position for a lot of schools is, well, he's got 6 or 8 years of teaching experience, he knows what he's doing, just put him in the classroom, close the door, it'll all be fine. But we sometimes forget that he was educated in a school that more than likely taught badly, or at least did not teach consistently well. And so he is largely, despite his education, imitating in his teaching what was done to him, or whatever happens to come most naturally to him, which may or may not correspond to what we're trying to accomplish in terms of the nature of our curriculum and the kinds of interactions that we want to facilitate for our kids' experience with that curriculum. More than that, once you get to the point, well, you're always going to be the point where you have multiple grades and multiple teachers, but it becomes even more critical when you begin to have multiple sections at the same grade. And the really dynamic, super creative, always on time rock star teacher starts to make the person next door or down the hall look really bad. And everybody starts heading to the principal's office in March saying, I really, really want my child to be in that class. And she's lovely. The other teacher is lovely. There's nothing wrong with her. I really want my kid to be in this class though, right? So we're negotiating that dynamic. So what's the cure? It's what I call common quality of experience. We're working constantly on a common quality of experience, which means that rather than using this really dynamic teacher as a template and saying, everybody, you need to be like her, what we're doing is we're defining the pedagogical environment. We're defining the instructional culture based on how we want the kids to experience it, not just based on what suits my personality or what I remember from when I was being taught. So we have to be, again, very intentional. What percentage of our 7th grade history class, for example, do we want to dedicate to conversation? How much of it should be lecture with students taking notes? How many projects or papers should there be? What's the workload? All the things that affect the way that the child spends time in that classroom need to be considered and defined. And it's best, as I mentioned before, if we can consider and define those in a collaborative way at a faculty level so that we all understand why we're doing what we're doing, but we're all doing what we're doing. And we're doing it together. So this is about a 4 or 5 year, 6 year kind of an exercise in a lot of schools. But if you haven't done it, if your school's 15 years old and you've not done this, it's time to do it. Makes a lot of things go better. What kind of faculty do we need? Not just credentially, not just educationally, not just experientially. What kind of faculty do we need? Who are they? What's important to them? I like collaborators. I like faculty who enjoy the opportunity to spend time with other faculty and share ideas and plan together. But some teachers don't fit that mold. Some teachers are, leave me alone, I'm in my room, I've got my thing, don't make me come to meetings. Oh, and are you going to pay me to do that curriculum planning thing that you need done, right? I am getting paid for that, right? So I need collaborators. This is just me, just my opinion. And I need people who like to be teammates. I don't need people who don't need other people. I want people who value what other people bring to the table, and as a friend of mine says a lot, they know how to play nice in the sandbox. And speaking of which, how does a person who has a hard time getting along with other adults going to teach children how to get along with one another? I mean, Is that a fair question to ask? I said in a conference, in a session over at Calvin College yesterday, polarizing teachers are not good for schools. If you've got a teacher that half your people love them and half your people just can't stand them, get rid of them. They will kill you. You can't afford for 50% of your teachers, of your parents and kids, to not respect a person who is crafting the culture of your school. But we have a tendency not to want to disrupt, and we have a tendency sometimes to kind of see somebody's virtues and overlook their flaws. But if you've got someone who is constantly mixing it up with people, you probably don't need them on your team. Choices. Then theological choices. This is, it's crucial because everything we do has some sort of a theological basis. I mean, the way that we think about the world, the way that we think about each other, the way that we think about who we are and what God wants from us and what God does for us, all of these things are rooted in a general theology. So the question is, the two questions to ask are what are our general boundaries within which we require everyone on our staff to agree, and where are the perforations in the boundary outside of which we allow people to hold their positions as a matter of conscience. And sometimes people don't think that this matters very much until you get maybe to 7th grade and you start talking about origin science and that sort of thing, and whether we're young Earth creationists or old Earth creationists or theistic evolutionists or whatever. But it matters all the way down. It matters in kindergarten, because the things that we say, especially to young children, are more likely to be remembered and more likely to be repeated, and will have more of a formative influence on kids and how they see the world and how they understand the Bible and how they put their own personal theology together, probably than our fancy apologetics class in 11th grade. So being careful or being intentional about those theological parameters and the areas within which we must have agreement, and the language that we use to express those doctrines or those biblical values, and then where are the areas where we have more flexibility. Let's talk about the choices we have in spiritual formation. We're Lutheran schools. But we probably all know, if it's not our own experience in our own schools, plenty of denominational schools that have more kids from other denominations than our own. Personally, I view that as a sign of success. It must mean that we're doing something right, that means something, or that is meaningful to someone other than people who identify with the word in the middle of in the middle of our name as a school. It's not only an exclusive measure of success, but I think it can be. It is a measure of success. But still, when we think about spiritual formation, a question to ask is, how flexible is our model of discipleship? And how accommodating might we be to other traditions of discipleship who are going to find their way into our school if we present ourselves in the marketplace as valuable and as capable? So I don't know. and it's going to vary for every school. I think it's a little bit more challenging a question for a confessional congregation in school than it might be for a less confessional congregation in school, because we have very specific ideas about what constitutes biblical and proper worship. Yes? Is that fair?
Yes.
Right. And so in the context of our school, how insistent will we be? Or how, not even insistent, how multidimensional might we be in the way that we lead kids to Christ? What are we modeling? What are the virtues that we need for our faculty and staff to embody? And it can't be all of them, right? Or at least not all of them all the time. There are certain virtues, there are certain fruits of the Spirit, say, that are more relevant or more necessary or applied more frequently in school than other places. So what are those? I didn't mention this before, but I am the interim head of a school in the Dallas-Fort Worth area this year. And about 4 weeks ago, I fired the head football coach, and then the week after that, I spent the week in meetings with football parents and a couple of players, one of whom was a quarterback, and when he came in, he was with his parents, he was fired up.
What?
Really. And they were all upset. I mean, it was a very lively. It wasn't a conversation. I was just sitting there. The AD was sitting here next to me, and we didn't say a word for 20 minutes. It just like whoosh came at us. And at one point, the boy, he's at the end of the table. He's going to be a senior. He puts his arms out and he's looking right at me, and he says, "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to do your job." Well, I said something. It wasn't mean, but it was abrupt. And, the meeting went on. He got very emotional, had to go out, had to come back in. And I was convicted that here's this kid, and, he's had this huge upset, and I did it. And he's come in, and maybe what he said to me or the way he said it to me was inappropriate, but I was convicted that I should have been more patient. Illustrating the point that certain of the virtues, certain of the fruits of the Spirit are more vital to the kinds of work that we do in schools than others. Joy is a really important one. Joy is a really important one. I mean, there's nothing worse than a grumpy teacher. Grumpy teachers equal grumpy kids and grumpy colleagues. It's infectious, right? So what do we want our teachers? What will we keep reminding each other to model for our students? Very important questions to ask. And then how are we going to worship? How will we worship? Will we try to meet kids where they are? Sometimes, ever? Will we do things that are a little bit more contemporary because that's the environment that they live in? Not recommendations, I'm just saying they're good questions for us to ask. Back to the question, what kind of experience do we want the children to have when we're worshiping? What kind of experience do we want the kids to describe about, or how do we want the kids to describe their experience with us? And worship is going to be central to their experience in our schools, hopefully. By the way, we all know this too, right? that whether a family are Lutheran or non-denominational or anything anymore, whatever faith tradition, they are considered to be regular church attenders if they go to church once a month. Once a month. In Austin, within a 5-mile radius of our church, Bethany Lutheran Church, 8% of the people who live within our church, within 5 miles of our church, go to church. I want to get the statistic right. More frequently than once a month, 8%. 20%, only 20%, only ever go to church once a year. It's 80% of the population who doesn't go to church. And a good percentage of those 80% would tell you that they're Christians. So whether we like to admit this or not, we're going to end up, if we haven't already, we're going to end up with a lot of Christian families, Lutheran families even, in our church, in our schools, who hardly ever go to church. At least they're busy. I mean, think about all the softball and hockey tournaments and all the stuff that, they've got good reasons. It's not like they're just watching television. They're going places. They're doing stuff. Point is, to me, it makes worship in school that much more essential for the kids' discipleship. So we need to think about it and plan it and talk about it. What's your experience, by the way, with that in your schools? In terms of frequency of church attendance and that sort of thing. For your Lutheran or even for your non-Lutheran, for your Lutheran or your non-Lutheran families, and is there a difference?
For our free tuition, we have to attend 50% of the time, and the other students that are tuition students get reduced rate most of the time, and they also have 50%.
So you've got an incentive built in.
But we also have chapel 5 days a week as well.
Yeah. Other schools? I mean, what are you seeing?
In my 3rd through 5th class, of the 11 students, I had 2 that went to church like twice that year.
Yeah.
Everybody else was like, but we had
Pretty regular.
the pastor's kid, the organist kids.
Yeah. Yeah, they go to church for work. Yeah, they get paid to go to church. Yeah. So that's just a reality of the culture we live in, and it's not going to get better. I mean, the numbers are going to keep going in the direction that they've been going. Okay, so let's talk about relationships. Our relationships with our students is the number one priority. School is for children. It is not for the convenience or the gratification of adults. But the adults are in charge. And so it's easy for us to arrange things so that the environment and the circumstances are more suitable to us than it is to them. And it's important to remind ourselves of that, I think. Because we get lost in the work. We get lost in the professionalism. We get lost in all of the responsibility and the schedules and the pace of activity. And it's easy to forget that they are the reason that this thing even is, not us. We didn't start the school so we could be employed. We started the school so we could teach kids. I run into this in the schools that I work with a lot, in middle and upper schools, in logic and rhetoric schools, over workload issues. And teachers who insist on a certain amount of homework for their classes in order for their classes to be able to proceed at the pace that they want the course to proceed. Meanwhile, we've got kids that are at school all day from 8 till 3, and then they do stuff after school often at school, and then they have to go home and maybe get some family time or go to church, and then 2-3 hours of homework. So we have these little people who can barely, remember to put on shoes in the morning, who have 50, 55-hour work weeks. I don't like a 50 or 55-hour work week, right? And most people wouldn't put up with it. But because of the adults, because of the things that we think we need from them, we just pile on, pile on, pile on. So it's for the kids. The second thing is our relationship with parents. We're 5 years old. We kind of have our group, or at least our founding group, the group of people who are pioneering with us. It's easy to take them for granted. It's easy to forget that they don't need to be here, that they don't need us more than we need them, that there needs to be a partnership that exists and a sense of care, customer care, if you will, I'll put it that way, that they feel served and that they feel like they understand what's going on. See, partnership, when I started in the school business almost 30 years ago, meant this. They came to a meeting at the beginning of the school year. We handed them a policy manual. They signed it. It was a lie because it was supposed to have said that they read it, but we didn't care because we just needed the signature. And then we said, you just follow our rules and we'll be good. We're all cool. That was the partnership. But does that work anymore? No, they come with all their own expectations, and they're more discerning. They have more options. They actually know more about school and school issues probably than many of our parents a couple of generations ago. They research. They talk to one another. They know what's going on. And so we have to work hard to stay connected to them, to build a sense of confidence, the relationships with them, and not treat them as if they are just, part of a transaction and not vital to what we're trying to do here in our community. And our faculty, they need to be included, they need to be taken seriously, they need to be empowered, and they need to be compensated. Well-paid teachers teach better. I'll just say that. Well-paid teachers teach better. Not every well-paid teacher teaches better, but generally speaking, a teacher who's with you because it's a good job and good pay is going to do a better job than someone who's with you because they can't get a job someplace else. All right? All right? So thinking about the 5-year mark, and they will go with you. There are going to be lots of teachers, some of you are here probably, who are like, I'm willing to work for almost nothing to get this thing off the ground. But that cannot be sustained. It can't be. It's exhausting. And for the school, as it grows into more of an institutional space, not to acknowledge the professional responsibility that we have to our employees is negligent. And it will come back to burn us over time. It will undermine what we're trying to accomplish. And like I said in the first session, if we cannibalize ourselves by mistreating or overlooking the needs of our teachers, we will be diminished, for sure. And then finally, the congregation. We have to do everything we can to continually nurture goodwill, because schools are hard on churches, not just on the building. They're hard on a lot of things. They're hard on the other ministries. They're hard on the people who come to church and people who give. They are difficult ministries for churches to really endorse and to sponsor well. I mean, we're there all the time. We're there all the time, and you know, it's like this. We can become like the house guest who's overstayed, you know, like the 3-day-old fish. So that's just the nature of it. You can't do anything about that, right? They're kids, and it's a school, and it's going to annoy somebody. But instead of standing back and saying things like, well, I just wish the church would support us more. Or they always talk about the youth group and they never talk about us. Or, you know, you've heard them, you know the lines, right? You know the lines. We have to be reaching out as a community, as a staff, as faculty. We have to be looking for ways to be accommodating. We have to be looking for ways to go out of our way for the people who were here first. We have to nurture goodwill and be good family members. So that's a description of the scope of stuff that we have to do in our not startup but early forming years. What else do you have to do? What did I miss? Think about when your school was somewhere between 3 and 7 years old. What problems did you have to solve that you didn't know, or you couldn't have foreseen? I covered them all. So, all right, thanks. Yeah, sorry, a couple questions.
So I'm not thinking like new school, but what if
Yeah.
you're at a church that the school's always been there?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it just needs to take a look of like as if they're starting again, because I don't think anybody's on the same page anymore.
Yeah, you're always. I mean, if the relationship between the congregation and other ministries and the school have been neglected, at any point, stop neglecting it and be proactive. The school needs to be proactive in that seeking of relationship. Yeah. And like I said before, you know, it's easy for schools to take the benefits that congregations provide for granted. Like, you know, the fact that we have a building to operate in that we didn't build ourselves, that we don't have to pay rent in maybe, or that we can share cleaning and maintenance costs with the school, those are huge benefits that other schools don't have, that it's easy for us not to forget to be grateful for. So at whatever point, even if it's a 100-year-old church and school, if there's distance between the school and the rest of the ministries, try to figure out ways to close the gap. Because you're the most expensive, and you're the most wear and tear too. So, you know, a school will get shut down before the ladies' Bible study, that's for sure. Yeah.
I'm confused about your comment that if 50% likes the person and 50% doesn't, get rid of them.
Yeah.
We're in a school where everyone is a cult servant. You don't just get rid of them.
Yeah, I know.
They're not under contract.
Yes, I know.
And I was taught there's only 3 reasons that you could get rid of a cult servant. 1, doctrinal issues.
Yeah.
2, immoral behavior.
Right.
And 3, the trickiest to prove not doing a good job.
Right.
But that would have to be really
Yeah. And I would say, well, and what I would say is, not to be too legalistic about it, but part of a teacher's job is building relationships with all of his students and all of his parents, and if he can't do that, he's not doing the job. But I've got to be very specific about that expectation, right? Yeah.
Those good policies.
I don't know how many of you have schools where you have a husband, wife, and teaching.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We have 2 sets,
Yeah.
and that gets trickier.
Yeah.
If one person's doing a really great job in probably why you called that couple, and the other one not so much, then it's
And they have kids in the school, so if you fire one of them, then they're going to take the kids maybe out too, right?
in this case, they aren't.
Yeah. Oh, and you have to see them at church on Sunday. No, I understand. It's not. I mean, it is complicated, but it requires us to put the mission and the integrity of our culture ahead of individual considerations. That's the challenge. Now, how we end up finagling that within the systems that we have is a separate question. But the purposefulness of saying we cannot afford someone on our staff who regularly undermines our values in the eyes of children and parents. We cannot afford to have that. And we do. I mean, even in schools that don't have call systems, in independent schools or other denominations, and we don't fire people enough. I mean, we don't. And when we do, we often do it so slowly that it might as well not have happened anyway, because they've already done the damage. But the integrity of the culture, the intentionality of the culture, the integrity of the mission depends on the people. Yeah.
So, one of the things, we're at 5 years, and one of the things that I think we really need to work on is kind of the us and them mentality between the congregation and the school.
Yeah.
And we've been working on it to the point where we've made progress, and people will say, yeah, that's our school, this is part of our mission, but then putting that into practice is, there are regressions and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. I wonder about governing the language and understanding the mission that you started with, where everything goes back to the mission. Is it a mission of the school? Is it a mission of the church through the school?
Yeah.
Or, how important is that?
Really important, because the language that you use will communicate either a sense of autonomy or a sense of connectedness between the other ministries of the church. So I think you've hit on something there because I detect this too with schools where there's friction with their churches. They tend to have this us them, or the school the church, rather than the school understanding itself to be a ministry of the church under the church's authority and beholden to the church's priorities. But because we're the biggest ministry and we generate our own revenue, we have a tendency to sort of slip out into this semi-autonomous region, and nobody really notices until there's a problem, and then we get that friction. I think that language is really important. And it's important that language be reviewed with the faculty every year, so that they're reminded that we are under the authority. We are a cooperative ministry of this church. We're not our own deal.
I'm thinking of it too from the church perspective, where the congregation 5 years ago said, oh yeah, go ahead, start a school.
Yeah.
And
That's
now they have to come to grips with having a school. Mm-hmm. Yes, this is our school.
Yes, they do. Yeah, but it's like any relationship. The aspect of the relationship that I can control, I want to control, and it's never 50-50, right? It's never. I mean, it's always somebody's always doing 60-40 or 80-20 in a good relationship. It's just seasons of life and all of that. So if we've got a gap, then we got to go 80-20 until we can sort of get some balance back into the relationship. If someone else had a thought or a question. All right. See you in a little bit.